Welcome to TechCrunch TV. My name is Gregory Ferenstein. I write policy for TechCrunch, and we are joined with Michelle Zatlyn.
That's
and
right.
we're here to talk about how Syria got cut off from the internet last week. Michelle, how exactly does a country get cut off from the internet?
Well, in this case, somebody made a change to the way that they configure the internet, and within 2 minutes, they were off the internet. And so, that at a really high level, that's what happened. Somebody within the government made a change, and they got cut off to the rest of the world.
And when we say the country of Syria, as in the entire country, no user could access any service outside of the country.
That's right. So when we say the internet gets shut off, I mean any sort of website that you visit, any email, Skype calls, phone calls, all communications was cut off for both the citizens of Syria, so people within the country, as well as people from anywhere else in the world trying to access a Syrian website or trying to get in touch with their Syrian relative.
And that's because most of the services that we typically access, like Google and Facebook and Gmail, eBay, those are controlled by servers outside of the country.
But in those cases, yes, they are all hosted in other places. So that's true. And basically, the internet is all connected. It's decentralized, and that's how the internet operates. And what happened within Syria was that they basically stopped communication with the rest of the internet. So if it was like trying to give somebody a handshake and no one there to receive the other side of the handshake.
And so how does that actually work? I mean, how does a government completely shut off access to the internet? And in this case, were there any ways to get around it?
Yes. Okay. So in this case, Syria, you have to look at the context. So Syria has 4 ways that the country accesses the external world internet. So they work with there are literally 4 gateways out of the country, like a line that connects them to the rest of the world.
A cable.
A cable, exactly. So there are 4. And so in one scenario, you could cut each of those cables off, and the internet would cease to exist because the cable no longer existed. Mm-hmm. That is unlikely what happened in this case, because if you look at the data, what happens was it only took 2 minutes for the whole internet to disappear from Syria. And so to think about having to cut 4 cable lines that were spread around the world, around the country in that 2-minute period would have to be a very, very orchestrated sort of event. And so that is highly unlikely because of the order in which it happened.
And so how do you think the government cut the country off?
What is much more likely is the government stopped accepting traffic from their 4 partners, that basically, the international carriers, which were, with the Turk Telecom and Telecom Italia and Tata and PCCW, all these different countries that they connect with.
Those are telecommunication services, much like AT&T, Verizon, internet service providers.
Exactly.
That's who serves them internet in Syria.
Exactly. Well, how they get connected to the outside world. And so over this course of 2 minutes, we saw that their connections with these external countries basically stopped. And so how you would do that is you basically write a command in a piece of hardware that they run internally, the state-run telecom, saying, we want to stop accepting traffic from our partners. So they basically said, we'll stop accepting traffic from our partners, and all of a sudden, they are now cut off from the international internet. And so there is a world where they could have existed, just Syria's internet could have stayed online for just Syrian citizens.
Yeah.
But again, based on the reports, that is unlikely.
So previously when this has happened in other Middle Eastern countries surrounded by political turmoil,
yes,
like in Egypt, people have been able to access services outside of the internet, or outside of the country, right? What are the ways in which people get around government blockades in other situations?
Sure. Well, in the case of Egypt, it took much longer for them to disable the internet access for the citizens. And if you look at why, again, the context is in Syria. There's one state-owned telecommunication provider that's run by the government, and there's 4 points of access out to the rest of the world. In Egypt, it's more closer to 10.
Okay.
So it took them longer to go around and shut down each of those 10.
Okay.
And there's more than one just state-owned telecommunication. So the structural, the context was different in Egypt in this case of how many people have the right to operate who own the internet within the country and how many access points to the outside world. And so for in this case, the citizens, again, it took a longer time to shut down each of those routes out.
Yeah.
And so even if you got rid of one of the main runs, you could go to one of the smaller routes, and that took longer to shut down.
Now, how do dissidents, usually in this case, what options are available to them if they want to use Twitter or communicate outside when a government tries to shut down the internet? Say in the case of Egypt, and then describe how Syria may have been different.
So again, in Egypt, you just go to a different provider, or you try, again, the one route that hasn't been shut off yet. So it's kind of like if here you're using in America, if your provider is at home, you use something like AT&T Home Internet, and the way it works is they're basically a level 3 customer at the end of the day. Level 3 shuts off access. Your AT&T internet doesn't work, but your office might use Comcast, and Comcast has a different provider, but that's still working. Okay. So it's the same sort of thing in Egypt, where maybe your provider got cut off, but there's another provider that's still working, and so you would seek that out. Okay. In Syria, where again, it's pretty remarkable if you just think of what happened. No access to phones, no access to internet for any citizen. That's really, if you think about it, it's a very somber sort of thought. And the only way that they could get access to the world is through a satellite phone. Now, I don't know about you, but I just don't own a satellite phone. And just not that many people do. And so there's companies like Iridium and these other satellite phones where they work by satellites. So they're bypassing the cables to get telecommunications.
And how did describe just a very, very briefly what your company does and how you knew Syria got cut off?
So I have a company called CloudFlare, and we provide performance, security, and availability for web properties online. And so websites sign up for us to make sure their website loads quickly, that they're protected from all sorts of attacks, and that their website is always available when their visitors are trying to access it. We've grown. We launched actually two years ago at TechCrunch Disrupt. That's where we launched our company. Oh, great. And we've grown really quickly. And we've seen businesses and governments and bloggers and small businesses, big businesses around the world sign up for our service. And you think, why? Why do they sign up for this service? And it turns out that making sure that your web property loads quickly, is always available no matter what the circumstances, and is free of threats is really, really difficult. And before CloudFlare, that just didn't exist. Okay. And so we have seen, only a third of our customers are based in the United States. The other 66% are international. Okay. And so we have lots of web properties that sign up, whether it's the Middle East, China, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, everywhere around the world, a ton of European websites that sign up to make sure that their sites are fast, safe, and available for their visitors. Because it turns out most people who are going to websites aren't necessarily going from one specific area.
And so when it comes to the Middle East, you've developed a presence in Middle East, at least in part given the turmoil around there?
So what we've seen is, so on Thursday we saw what happened in Syria with internet being shut off. But even earlier last week, there's a lot of turmoil going on in the Middle East. A lot of political conflict between Israel, the Palestine, Egypt. There's a very complicated situation. And when there was a ceasefire that came about, we saw a huge rise in online attacks, which could have been our first cyber war. And what happened were a lot of these web properties got knocked offline. Okay. And if your website got knocked offline, the first thing you do is, how do I get it back online? And they find out about services like CloudFlare. They sign up. We get their site back online even though they're under attack. And the word spreads very quickly. So we have a lot of very big organizations, a lot of government organizations, a lot of really key websites that are using CloudFlare to keep their website online from these denial of service attacks.
But when it came to Syria, there was nothing that CloudFlare could have done because no information was accepted at all.
Exactly. So in Syria, we have a lot of Syrian websites that use us, again, to make their websites fast for the visitor, safe. And we had the last 4 websites that accepted traffic before the internet shut off. But in this case, there was nothing we could do because Syria just stopped being part of the internet. And when the country stops being part of the internet, I mean, we couldn't fulfill our promise. And so to anybody else, they could still get to the websites, but people within Syria, they're just cut off.
That's fascinating and concerning at the same time. Well, I wanted to thank you for coming by the studio, and please keep up the great work.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.